Hi all, my name is Chris Foster, and today I'd like to show you my most recent work, Time Spring, for the LuxRender Community Competition, Poetry in Motion. And so it was about 5.5 hours of work spread over 4 weeks, and so this is going to be the time-lapsed creation process. Anyway, let's get started. Some background on this piece. Like most of my work, I started by sketching it on paper, and for me the sketching process is nothing defining, because I really have my ideas pretty well in my head, so I sketch it to constrain my ideas to the frame of a camera. And so the sketch is not really anything to look at, it's more of a very quick, how can I make this work on paper kind of thing. So anyway, once I have my sketch, I start up in Blender. And so I set up the main project file, start with a plane, extrude some blocky shapes upward just to fit the ideas I had in my head. And I wanted even polygon distribution because now I've started to sculpt it, and the even polygon distribution really makes this a lot easier, a lot nicer. And so really I've added a multi-res modifier. And I will just be stepping up through the levels of multi-res subdivision, just really defining the shapes as I go. And that's very typical. Here I'm using the blob tool. I'd never used the blob tool before, and so I really just experiment with a lot of things. Really, I liked it for making river rocks because rocks on the bottom of rivers at least are pretty much just blobs. So. Anyway, yeah, now I'm going back and creasing in between. And yeah, kind of moving the camera. There I realized that in order to cover all of the view of the camera, I needed to extend the terrain back. And well, multi-res is misbehaving a little bit over there, but it doesn't matter. And really, it's hard to do it at this level of subdivision currently, but I really wanted to get away from just the, lumpy wall look and get more to a stack of rocks. But that'll become more apparent as the levels become higher. Okay. So what I want to do is really cover each part of the camera's view with terrain. That's the ultimate goal, because then I don't have to worry about finding an appropriate sky that will kind of blend in and work with the terrain in there. If you cover it all with terrain, you're not going to see the sky unless it's in a reflection, and the only reflection in this scene would be off the water, which would be very blurry. So that's not going to be a problem. So here I'm actually covering the last bit of the camera's view, checking back with the camera a bunch to make sure I've covered it all. There we go, it's pretty much all covered. So I think I'm getting closer to a stack of rocks as opposed to a lumpy wall. Here I'm using a texture for a sculpting brush, just adding in some high frequency noise to the mesh. And okay, now I'm unwrapping. I'm selecting the edges I want to make seams, and now preparing the UV layout because I'm about to start texturing. Okay, here we go. And that last island, yes, I scaled it down because it's on the side and off the camera's view, so it's very unimportant. I wanted to pack them in tightly so I could stretch it to the 8K texture map, which I just made. Created a texture folder. Okay, now going to cgtextures.com. It's a great source of base textures. I just took a base rock, cropped it, made it seamless, so it's a brush now. I'll be using that to paint the base rock layer onto the diffuse texture. So really, I chose the 8K map because the extra detail really just helps that much more. So if you can spare the processing power and the RAM, I would always opt for the higher textures, the higher resolutions. But Blender really did kind of hate its life while I was doing this, and you know that's just by virtue of the fact that it had to paint on 8K. But it got over it, and I think the final result was better because of it. So here I'm actually checking back with the camera's view multiple times to make sure I'm not painting on anything I don't have to. Really don't spend time on things that aren't going to be inside the view. Do only as much work as you have to. I think really that's a founding principle of a lot of CG, is just don't do more work than you have to. Here I'm taking the same texture with a bit of brown mixed in. Just get some texture variation going. Putting it in the cracks where there might be some dirt or something like that. Figured the bottom here would be the most dirty. Alright, back to CG textures. Let's get some moss happening. So again, open the texture up. There are some really bright, weird spots in here, so I was just fixing them. Crop that, sharpen it, make it seamless, save it out, and that's my new moss brush. Let's paint some moss. Here we go. Just on the rock. Again, I'm checking back with the camera's view to make sure I'm not painting moss where I don't have to. Well, I took a break to get real dirt happening, so it's not just brown rock. There we go. Okay, it's looking a lot better. With this moss, I actually got into a bit of trouble only painting where I thought the camera would see, is because I actually moved the camera later. So I think the idea is good, but it did get me into trouble this time. But it wasn't so bad. It worked out in the end, but these are just things you learn. Okay, just experimenting with a material so I can kind of see some specular highlights. Ooh, and then I tried a displacement modifier, which I had never used before, just to kind of get a better idea of how it would look. I didn't really like that, so I ditched it. Alright, I think that's done. Time to set up the fluid simulation. Here's my domain. I duplicated the terrain at a lower resolution to create the obstacle, and duplicated some faces off of that to make the inflow, extended the domain to fit it, and here's the outflow. I needed the outflow, it turns out, because in a couple of tests the water from the inflow kind of splashed up against that side of the domain kind of weirdly, and the outflow helps prevent that. So let's do a couple test bakes at a low resolution. And for all of these I paused the recording during the baking just because FFmpeg seemed to slow to a crawl. Or sorry, no, Blender slowed to a crawl while FFmpeg was doing its thing. Anyway, during this project I encountered a weird bug with the fluid simulator, and that was that if you start with any start time other than 0, the first frame will be the correct start time, but the second frame will be twice that, and then it'll continue as normal until end time plus the start time. That was weird, so I actually dug around a bit and fixed it, submitted a patch, and recently Brecht committed that, and So it works. Thank you very much, Brecht. So I used 250 for the final, but anyway, that's enough for the fluid simulation. Onto the pedals. So here I'm just searching Google Images for references, get an idea of what it should look like. Now I'm started modeling. Excuse me. Alright, adding solidify modifier. And something I thought of on the fly while I was doing this was to control the thickness with a weight group. So that's what I'm doing now, painting on the weight to control the thickness. And I'm about to set that in the solidify modifier. There you go. Okay, just getting a good idea of it. Yeah. So I think that worked nicely. That'll be something that I keep in mind for future projects. Subsurf, make it all smooth. Everything looks nice. I'm adding this armature so I can pose each pedal individually with some IK. Just get some unique bending in each one. Reposition it so that the bottom of the pedal is at the origin of the object. Okay, whoop, two armature modifiers there. Okay. Fixed. So this is about done. Let's bring it into the world. That's a really big pedal, so so now I'm using the background terrain to kind of figure out how big this should be. I've applied both the scale for the armature and the mesh, just because I hear that LuxRender, I don't know if it's still a problem, but it really likes unscaled meshes, so I don't know. It was easy to do, so it might as well just do it. Anyway, now I'm positioning lots of pedals all parented to an empty, so I can control their rotation better. Rotation around the middle, I mean, as if they were being swirled by wind. And while animating their falling, I just changed the first set of keys to a linear interpolation, sorry. And that is so that when the image starts rendering, it will be as if the pedals have been falling already. And I kept the last set of keys to be Bezier interpolated, because that will give them more weight in the motion blur. And so the positions you'll see more of will be the end ones. That's kind of what I wanted. So here you can see I repositioned the camera again. And that's what got me in trouble with the mouse. But yeah, scale up the camera so I can actually, kind of visualize better which pedals are inside the view when, and I'll just go and put them all inside the view. It's pointless to have them outside of it. Okay. Kind of defining the motion for each one, each of the important ones at least. Okay, and I don't know if there was an easier way. I'm sure there was, using, I don't know, particle systems or something of doing this, but I did it all by hand. You do have ultimately more control over that, but can be a bit of a hassle. Anyway, I created a dark background on the terrain temporarily so I could better see the motion blur, which I created with the with Blender's internal renderer. Sorry, I'm having problems today. That's just a good way to kind of visualize the motion blur before you spend days on it in LuxRender. So there you go. I like the bottom right one there, and I kept that one for the final. But here I'm fixing intersecting paths. Like that. Those two kind of bump weirdly. Okay. Let's move on to another type of pedal. Those are falling, so these will be sliding down the river, flowing down it. Excuse me. I'm using the Snap 2, the Snap 2 closest face snap option, and I've also selected the little button to the right. I don't remember what that's called, but it aligns the object to the surface normal, and that just helped keep the pedals kind of afloat on top of the, pointing the right directions on the water. I thought this was a good idea to have pedals flowing down the water as well as falling in through the air, but it didn't work as I planned. It really looks like the pedals on the water are just falling as well. So, well. It's just, try a lot of things, experiment all the time, and I think that's largely the artistic process. And if it doesn't work, worst case scenario, you just undo it. So really, don't be afraid to experiment. These pedals are going to be static. Just going to be sitting around on the rock. I did everything here by hand, which was a bit of a pain. I think there are some add-ons for Blender, like is something called the Grease Scatter add-on. I don't really know much about it, but I hear they used it in Syntel for like random positions of random objects. Might have been useful here. I don't really know. Might be something to look into for my next project. This was a problem because I forgot to name all the meshes before I duplicated them. It's just luckily it wasn't too much of a pain just to name them. There weren't hundreds of pedals, but make sure your object is exactly how you want it before you duplicate it 34 times. Anyway, here I've prepared the UV layout for the pedal. The texture is small. It's 256 by 511 or 512, because really each pedal is not going to take up much screen real estate. So just using Google, or what I saw on Google, as a reference. Yeah, you can see that the pink color kind of bleeds into the white through these vein type things. Yeah, and I think that's looking pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So there was just a little issue with the middle of the seam there and some of the outers. Fix that. Okay, switch to a higher resolution of rock, and I could see that some of the pedals were stuck in there. Anyway, let's get a sky. So I went to openfootage.net. It has some great HDRI panoramas. Anyway, so I picked one that looked nice, and switched the renderer to Luxrender by this point, and yeah, now I'm determining where the sun is by making a reflective sphere, and I want it behind the camera. So once it's behind the camera, as it is now, really start setting up the other materials. All of the materials except for the water are matte, and really I think matte is one of the most underrated material types ever. I think it's extremely useful. So really I don't think I was at any loss for not using glossy materials or something like that. Doing just a couple test renders, making sure all the camera settings are properly set up before doing the final render. There we go. Just a couple tests. I like where this is going. Okay. Setting everything, and this is the final test at full resolution. It's coming out nicely. Think we're done. So there we go. It's time for the final render. So after I rendered out all of the 400 subframes, I merged them all together uniformly. I didn't merge any of them twice. Really, each of them has equal weight. And so the final image here came out to be about 3.2 kilosamples per pixel, and that just makes perfect sense because I rendered each subframe out to 8, and there were 400 of them. So that's all fine. In a final critique of my work, I see there is still some grain here, around the water, especially, and I'm sure that's just because of the refraction that took place, and the sampling thereof is a little difficult, and I didn't have enough time to render it to anything higher. I would have liked to do maybe 10 samples per pixel per frame, which would give me about 4 kilosamples. But I think it's fine. It's not too grainy to the point it's distracting. But other than that, as I said before, the petals, the ones that were supposed to be floating in the water, look like they're falling along with the other petals. So I don't know, maybe in a future project that's just like this or something like that, I'd leave them out. But I don't think that's distracting either. One thing that is a problem I see is that the water looks like it's stepped, like terraces or something like that, and well, that's because it is. I was only able to do a fluid of 250, or with a resolution of 250 on my laptop. I don't know why. That's the highest I could actually get it to do. And that's very bizarre because I have 12 gigabytes of RAM in this laptop, so that must not be the problem, but it just would not pre-calculate. It would kind of try to start for a minute or two and then just die. So that was bizarre. Anyway, so then I tried it on my desktop computer, which is much older and has only 4 gigabytes of RAM, and I was able to do up to 320 or higher. I just chose 320. But after 10 hours of pre-calculation, it threw a bad alloc and died. So I was running out of time at that point, so I stuck with the 250 that my laptop could do. Anyway, so in future fluid simulation projects, I'd really like to find a workaround for this and get high resolution fluids, because that is slightly distracting. But oh well. Anyway, that's about all that pops out at me. Just looking at this image right here. Anyway, I'd like to thank the Blender and LuxRender communities. They're just really great places that are very supportive of art and artists, and they both revolve around great pieces of software. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to Binary Cortex on the LuxRender forums. He's the competition coordinator, and I really appreciate your efforts in coordinating these competitions. I think they're a great thing for the community, and I hope they keep coming. So anyway, that's about all I have for this work. Hopefully I'll have another work soon to show everybody. Anyway, thanks for watching.